Welcome to Conversations with Dr. Skip Mason,
pastor, preacher, historian, author,
teacher, librarian, archivist, world traveler,
collector, family historian, avid reader, and creator of the popular Vanishing Black Atlanta Facebook page.
With a lot of folks who love history.
Most importantly, he's our dad who loves his family and who taught us the importance of our history and having important conversations.
Join him now for this episode of Conversations with Dr. Skip.
Well, good Sunday afternoon, my brothers and my sisters. Thank you so much for joining me for another conversation with our bishops and bishops' families as we celebrate the 150th anniversary of the Christian Methodist Episcopal Church. I'm delighted that you could stop by on this Sunday afternoon for a very interesting conversation with two of our founding fathers, Bishop William Henry Miles and Bishop Lucius Holsey. Before we get to that, however, my good friend Greg Williams, Pastor Greg Williams, called me after he received the announcements and in his own humorous way said, "How are you going to interview two dead bishops?" I said, "Just tune in and watch." And so today we're going to hear from them in their own words, not physically hear from them, but I'm going to share a little bit about what I've collected about them on top of the great scholarship that has been done by many of our great scholars in our church. And I want to just have an opportunity for you as we continue our celebration of our 150th to hear from the voices of the men and women who have helped to make this church, helped to make and shape this church, and whose gigantic shoulders we stand on. Let me first begin by acknowledging our senior bishop, Lawrence Reddick, and his wife, Wendy Reddick, and the College of Bishops and their spouses. I am so tremendously grateful for the opportunity to share. It even got me an opportunity to present at the annual conference of the great 7th Episcopal District and the New York and Washington region. Bishop Walker, thank you so much for the invitation to come and to share with your wonderful preachers and lay about the educational history as I've documented of our great church. I appreciate that. So I acknowledge you as the chair of our CIT, as well as my bishop, Bishop Thomas L. Brown and Dr. Louise Baker Brown. And let me acknowledge and thank the wonderful Dr. Teresa Duhart for her support. Before we begin, I want to just kind of set the context for the discussion, and I invite you to watch a portion of this documentary. I think that will help us.
For more than 2 centuries, African American churches have served as a means of inspiration and hope, which emphasize the meaning of individual transformation. Even when the prevailing notions of the country didn't advocate for fair treatment of African Americans, Black theologies discussed the liberation of the marginalized and the injustices visited upon Blacks in America. The late Charles Lincoln, a Duke University professor and a leading scholar in Black religion, argued that Blacks brought their religion with them from Africa, and that later, in his words, they accepted the white man's religion, and they haven't always practiced it the white man's way. In the late 1700s, Blacks worshipped in the same building with whites, but separately, many times in the balcony of the church or wherever they could congregate.
As long as there were people, there was church. When you enter someone's home and gathered at the table, communion was every time you do this in remembrance of me. The actual partaking and choosing to worship no matter where you are is a part of the freedom that we claim.
Even though slavery was a dominant force or the controlling force in their lives, that through singing they could be transported beyond that immediate experience into a realm that allowed them to envision themselves as free. They did not simply acquiesce or adapt Christianity without incorporating their own sense of what Christianity meant.
Because many enslaved African Americans were barred from formal education, they used spirituals to communicate with one another. For example, a spiritual like Swing Low, Sweet Chariot was used along the Underground Railroad to help transport people out of bondage to the North.
The musics could be used as a way of communicating among other slaves. For example, the time or the place for a slave to run away, to get away from the plantation, to remove themselves from the slavery and bondage. There is one spiritual, Run Mary Run, I say, you've got a right to the tree of life, that fits into that category. Tonight is the night where you need to steal away, where you need.
So, my brothers and sisters, I shared this tidbit of an excerpt because both of the bishops that I am having a conversation with came out of the vestiges of slavery. They were both enslaved and both encountered and experienced many similarities, but certainly the horrors of what was known as slavery. Bishop William Henry Miles. Bishop Lakey, our distinguished church historian, writes about him in his book, From Miles to King. And he indicates that Bishop Miles was born in December of 1828 in Springfield, Washington County, Kentucky, and he was set free in 1854. Let me put this map up of Springfield for those of you who may not be familiar with the area so we can see the proximity of Springfield to Louisville, Kentucky. But this is the area for which our bishop came out of. He had a very interesting history prior to coming to the Christian Methodist Episcopal Church. He was not born a CME, as we know, but very much a part of the Methodist Episcopal Church. Our great bishop, Bishop Charles H. Phillips, penned a wonderful portrait of Bishop Miles in the 1892 Christian Index. And Bishop Lawrence Reddick, who was then the editor of the Christian Index, reprinted it in its entirety. But it gives us a very vivid picture of Bishop Miles's life and his journey, particularly his spiritual journey and how he came to know the Lord and what he did when he was freed in 1854. The will of his owner was contested. And it was not until 1864 that by compromise he came to enjoy his freedom. And he was very distinguished and very well respected in his community. He married, this is Mrs. Frances Ellen Arnold Miles, his beloved wife, whom he married in 1859 in Lebanon, Kentucky. They lived together until his death, and they had 8 children. 4 of whom were deceased by the time Bishop Miles died in 1892. His 4 daughters, he had 3 daughters and a son living, Susie, Nettie, William, and Lincoln. And he once said that he long cherished the hope that he might live to see his daughters married, and he lived to see his hope sweet to rich fruition. And so he was a family man as well as a great preacher. He joined the Methodist Episcopal Church South in 1855. And those of you who are familiar with our history know that the Christian Methodist Episcopal Church members were very much a part of some of the slave owning plantations of persons who were members of the Methodist Episcopal South. He was baptized by Reverend Emberson by pouring, as it is noted. And that's when, at the age of 32 years old, he received his conversion. He said that if ever I was happy, it was the night in the old Methodist church in Lebanon that he was baptized and that he received Christ. Let me move quickly because there are a couple of things that I want to share with you about his very fascinating life. He was called to preach. He accepted his call to preach, and he was licensed in 1857 by Reverend Redford of the Methodist Episcopal Church South. And then he began to move about throughout the area, the Kentucky area, primarily as a preacher. He moved to Ohio. He later returned to Kentucky for a short period of time. He was sent back to Ohio, and then he decided that he would join the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church, or the Lord led him to join the AME Zion Annual Conference, which was organized in 1865. He took the work, he labored successfully, and he was appointed to the Center Street Church. It is written that as a result of his preaching and meetings and revivals, that over 128 persons were converted and 78 of whom he baptized. At one of the sessions of the Kentucky Conference of the AME Zion Church, he was appointed a missionary to travel and to organize churches. However, the church did not provide for him any substance or any support for him, so he resigned from the AME Zion Church. Bishop Logan was the bishop at that time of the Methodist Episcopal Church South, and so he sent a letter to him and invited him to come and to be a part of the organization or the general conference of what would become these colored Methodist churches. And I think I have, if I can pull up that article for you, it's amazing in terms of technology. Let's see, that's the Washington, Michigan Conference. But unfortunately, the type is so small, sometimes I can't see what I'm pulling up. The organization, here we go, of the Colored Conferences of Virginia and North Carolina. And it begs for me to share this with you. As announced by Bishop Pierce and Reverend Burton, as we know, Bishop Pierce would be in Jackson, Tennessee to help us organize our church. There was a meeting of the colored ministers belonging to the ME Church of Virginia and North Carolina at Enfield last week for the purpose of organizing a conference in the two states under the General Colored Conference of America last December. At the general organization last December, 2 colored men were ordained, Bishop W.H. Miles of Kentucky and one Vanderhorst of Georgia. It just gives me chills, my brothers and sisters, to see our founding fathers and our bishops in print in the 1860s and in the 1870s as they went about to do the great work of the church as it was known. Let me talk about a physical description of Bishop, and I think you will find this interesting of Bishop Miles. Let me put this clipping up. Bishop William H. Miles of the Colored Methodist Episcopal Church in America weighs 300 pounds, wears a suit which cost him from $4 to $7, carries a pair of old-time red leather saddle pockets, and is worth $20,000 in money and city property. He is self-made, but he is made. This comes from the Christian Union. 300 pounds is what they described. And I don't know whether they are exaggerating or not. At the pictures that I've seen of him, of course, he may be stocky and heavy, but what we do know that he was commanding. He was a commanding figure. But, you know, I want to share a quick thought with you as I have a rambling moment, as Bishop Marvin Frank Thomas would say. From my reading of the classical history of the CME Church by Bishop Lakey, If you don't have it, you should have it. This is the year where everyone ought to be reading and rereading these classic texts, including the history of the CME Church. There's another one by F.M. Hamilton. F.M. Hamilton, he co-authored O Rapture Sings with Bishop Holsey, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. Then we, of course, have the first treatment of the history of the bishops was the one that Moses Pettigrew did, which was called From Miles to Johnson. And Mr. Pettigrew, Reverend Pettigrew, said that Bishop Miles was a rugged individualist of strong conviction who planned well and organized thoroughly. Let me share this thought with you, and then I'm going to get to some of the quotes that I pulled up that are going to be a part of the book that I'm actually working on and hope to have it finished by December. But I don't want this moment to jump out. Bishop Miles, or then Reverend Miles, at that time, was selected to go to the conference in Tennessee, in Jackson, Tennessee. He was chosen, listen to this, brothers and sisters, as a reserve candidate. Okay, he wasn't a delegate. He wasn't one of the official delegates. I guess we might call them alternate delegates. And so during the session of the general session, as I'm reading from what Bishop Phillips wrote, he did not speak more than 2 or 3 times. He sort of sat in the back. His sermon, however, when he preached, evidenced his metaphysical turn in mind. This is what Bishop Phillips writes, and his great reasoning ability. On December the 21st, 1870, after a season of prayer, the General Conference proceeded to the election of 2 bishops by ballot. Lucius Holsey, Reverend Lucius Holsey, who had been made a bishop, who would later become made a bishop, and B.S. Newton were appointed the tellers. Their job was to count. Bishop Miles was elected upon the first ballot, and Bishop Vanderhorst upon the third. By a rising vote, the election was declared unanimous. Listen to this. This was the alternate delegate, or the reserve delegate. This was the one who had been a part of the AME Zion Church, who came and sat in the back of the church, not looking for anything, not expecting anything. But it is amazing to see that they recognize his ability, they recognize his oratorical skills, and they recognize something that God had on him, that he would be able to carry and manage our church in its infancy. And I find that to be an amazing testament to Bishop William Henry Miles. I had the opportunity to travel to Louisville, Kentucky, and to find his grave because I really didn't know the location. Let me share this with you. Good morning. This is Skip Mason. I'm in Louisville, Kentucky, attending the funeral of the daughter of my college roommate and my line brother. But I decided also to stop by the Louisville Colored Cemetery, which is what it was known. Now it's the Louisville Cemetery, to find the final resting place of the first bishop of the Christian Methodist Episcopal Church, then known as the Colored Methodist Episcopal Church, in the name of Bishop William Henry Miles. And so after driving around, the Spirit led me to a beautiful hill overlooking this magnificent cemetery that Bishop Miles established. And I came upon this magnificent structure, which is the marker for our esteemed first bishop elected in 1870 at the General Conference in Jackson, Tennessee. And so to all of my CMEs, this is our first bishop. Miles College is named for him, as well as churches throughout the country. Beautiful grave for Bishop Miles, Kentucky in 1828. Bishop Miles died here in Louisville in 1892. Well, it was a very windy day in Kentucky at the time, but you get it. I had to go while I was in Louisville, Kentucky, attending the funeral, to go and to pay homage and tribute to this great man who not only organized our church, but was so well thought of and respected. May I share just some articles with you that I've collected? Of course, this is the 100th birthday of the late bishop, and there was a great observance celebrated with regards to that. I shared with you about his involvement in the organization of many of the conferences. This is from the St. Louis Times. Bishop William H. Miles, W.H. Miles of Louisville, the first ordained bishop of the Colored Methodist Church South, has recently issued a circular design to reach all classes of Christians of all nationalities or complexions who have a truly Christian interest in the religious advancement of the colored race. Check this out. This was in the London paper. This was taken from the London paper and reprinted in the Louisville Courier. A black bishop in a white pulpit, a very noteworthy event in Louisville religious history occurred yesterday. Bishop Miles of the Colored Methodist Church of America preaching the first sermon ever delivered in the white church, or a white church in this city, by a colored minister. Bishop Miles is here in attendance upon the general conference of his church and was invited last week to occupy the pulpit of the Reverend Mr. Settles Church at the corner of 5th and Walnut. Bishop W.H. Miles is the senior bishop of the Colored Methodist Church and is generally recognized as his ablest representative. He is a large man of much dignity, of bearing and person. His style is usually fervent and eloquent, and there is no hesitation of language or thought. The attendance at the church yesterday afternoon was quite large, many white persons being present with the delegates from the conference and other colored auditors. His sermon was listened to with great attention and interest. There are some of the rare documents of Bishop Miles, and I want to pull this particular one up for you, of him presiding at one of our general conferences. This is 1886. The 6th General Conference of the Colored Methodist Church of America convened at Trinity CME Church, the church I pastored for 7 years in Augusta. All the bishops were present. Senior Bishop W.H. Miles called the meeting to order and requested the secretary of the last general conference to call the list of the annual conferences. The brethren present answered to their names, and 58 were found to be present. A majority of the delegates being present, the conference session was open as follows. Bishop J.A. Beebe read Proverbs and Galatians. Bishop L.H. Holsey lined, and the conference joined in the singing of hymn number 225, O Spirit of the Living God. I want you to just listen to
O Spirit of the living God, the light and fire divine, descend upon thy church once more and make it truly thine. Fill it with love and joy and power, with righteousness and peace, till Christ shall.
Can you hear Bishop Holsey and the conference lining that hymn? And then Bishop Isaac Lane offered a fervent prayer. I wanted to share that with you so that we could just understand the magnitude and the holiness of that occasion of which Bishop Miles presided over. So now what I want to do as I close out my conversation about Bishop Miles is to share some thoughts in his own words that Bishop Miles has left for us. These are some of the wonderful gems that I've found that will be in my book in December. And I'm going to read those for you in just a moment. I'm sorry, I had to pull up my actual reading of it so I could see what you see. I am still trusting. I have been serving the Lord for too long for him to desert me now in these my last hours, and at a time when I need him the most. Bishop William H. Miles. On preachers being able to read. This is what Bishop Miles had to say. The past must go for itself. We have new duties and we must get ready for them. What are you going to do with all them children in school, having them taught to read and then send them to a preacher who can't read? Shut up your schools to keep your congregational level with the pulpit, or raise your pulpit to keep it level with your congregation. Bishop Miles. Bishop Miles said in his address in 1886 that a trained ministry is our greatest need today and has been ever since we assume our organic obligations. There is no need that rivals this at present. We need a pastorate that is more capable to properly fill all the places and functions of the ministry. We have hundreds of preachers in active work who are morally good but mentally deficient, both as pastors and preachers. Already, our people are demanding what we cannot, in most instances, give: an educated preacher. On evangelism, Bishop Miles had this to say: good and competent men, thus employed, might accomplish much for in the salvation of sinners and in extending the borders of the church, expanding and perpetuating its institutions. On education, Bishop Miles said this at the first quadrennial address of the CME Church in 1873. The subject of education and ministerial training claims your best attention and deepest consideration. It is eminently the question of the session. It enters deeply and immediately into all the operations and relations of the church. We may not expect to do a great deal at present in educating the masses of our people, but we can educate our young preachers. On the training of preachers, Bishop Miles said, these conferences, should all have some sort of literary society or someone empowered with authority to assign to several of the preachers in each certain ministerial, theological, and practical subjects to be written during the year and discussed during the conference. Bishop Miles said on the delegates' responsibility at the General Conference, we have special wants. We want to do what we came here to do. The people have sent you here at great expense. We should have respect for our constituents. We should legislate wisely, but not too hastily, and do the work we came here to do. And then the last one on general conferences, he said, do not allow yourself to be irritated. Let us try and have a conference that will prove a credit to us. I am desirous on my part to have a religious general conference, a quiet and peaceful one. I should dislike very much to have it said that we were so unruly we could not have a pleasant conference. It would be unchristian and ungentlemanly in us, and a disgrace to our civilization. I love to see you contend in a good feeling way. If we do this, we will have the approval of our God. There is nothing like peace. The words of Bishop Miles. The legacy of Bishop Miles today is all over our Zion and throughout our church at Miles College. Many churches bear the name of Miles, Miles Memorial, Miles Tabernacle, Miles Bethel, and we are grateful to God today for the legacy of our first bishop, Bishop William Henry Miles. Let us say amen and ashe. Now, my brothers and sisters, We've had a chance to share a little with Bishop William Henry Miles. Let us now make preparation to share on some of the life and legacy of our fourth bishop, Bishop Lucius Holsey. But permit me to share this brief clip to continue to get us and to create the context that is needed.
Christianity and slavery were long intertwined. While masters believed that their religion could be used to pacify their slaves, African Americans transformed Christianity and created a new culture that would serve as the foundation of their freedom struggle.
The oldest independent African American denomination is the African Methodist Episcopal Church, founded in Philadelphia in 1794 by Richard Allen, the formerly enslaved black man who purchased his own freedom.
Black religious leaders such as Reverend Allen took a strong abolitionist stance, even helping slaves escape through the Underground Railroad. During the Civil War, some served as army chaplains, and once the war ended, many mobilized black political participation. Some even held public office.
The black church provided leadership opportunities for men and women who, by and large, were in subservient positions in the workforce. And so all of these preachers doing work in the black church have been critical to giving black people a space to envision that a different world is possible.
My brothers and sisters, it is my delight to have a conversation and to talk about the very rich life of one of our beloved bishops, the fourth bishop of the Christian Methodist Episcopal Church, Bishop Lucius Holsey. Bishop Lakey writes in his book, "Few, if any, would dispute the assessment of Lucius Henry Holsey as the most influential personality in the history of the CME Church." The fourth bishop, actually tied for third, was the main spokesman for the CME Church in its formative years, giving definition and rationale to the new branch of Methodism. Bishop Lucius Henry Holsey, as some of you know, was born in Hancock County. He was actually born in Columbus, Georgia, but he grew up and lived in Hancock County and in Sparta, which is where he was licensed to preach. And so Hancock County and Sparta is very rich in the CME history and very much would be an influential part of the life of Lucius Henry Holsey. He was a self-taught person. He taught himself to read, licensed to preach in 1868, and then he was assigned to the Hancock circuit, as it has been noted, and then later he was assigned to Savannah, but he did not fare well in Savannah, very similar to what John Wesley had written and experienced some years ago during his time in Savannah, where he failed miserably. But the Georgia Colored Conference was being organized and elected him as a delegate to the organizing conference. And there's so much to share on Bishop Holsey. And let me share a couple of images for you. First of all, this unique image of Bishop Holsey and some of the preachers of Georgia. I have confirmed the location of this. Bishop Holsey is in the center. He has his hat down, and there appears to be either a cane or an umbrella, and he is dead smack in the center. And he is surrounded by many of the preachers, I'm assuming, of Georgia. This is in front of the old Springfield Baptist Church in Augusta, Georgia. In fact, the building is still standing. And when we were engaged in trying to identify where this picture was taken, It led us straight to the church. Those two entrances are still there. And this was also the birthplace of Trinity. Trinity came out of the old Methodist church, and the Methodist church sold this building to Springfield. And so this building was used to house this particular meeting of Bishop Holsey and his preachers. We know that at the call conference in 1873, Bishop Lucius Holsey was elected the fourth bishop of the church. And this is an announcement about that call session of the General Conference that will convene in the city the 19th of March, 1873 at Trinity with Bishop Pierce and Bishop Metier presiding and Bishop Miles presiding. Bishop Lucius Holsey would become bishop. At that time, he served as the presiding elder and became one of the leading voices of our church. This is taken from the conference minutes when it was asked where the preacher stationed that year. This is 1869. You can see L.H. Holsey, Trinity Church, Richmond Circuit. Lucius Holsey's life has been very well documented. He published a number of books, the autobiography, sermons and addresses and essays, and several scholars have also written about the life of Bishop Holsey, and I'm going to just have some of these books for your pleasure. John Cade wrote The Incomparable, Holsey the Incomparable. Glenn Askew, Black Elitism and the Failure of Paternalism in Postbellum Georgia, the Case of Bishop Holsey. So his life is very well documented. And then, of course, he is documented in From Miles to King by Bishop Lakey. And in other sources. So we can find a great deal about our beloved bishop. Let me share a couple of images with you as we see Bishop Holsey's family listed in the census records. Bishop Lucius Holsey, his wife Harriet, his son Claude, and his son and Charles, and his daughter, and others that were living in the household. And I apologize, I have on my Dollar Tree readers and not my regular glasses because I couldn't find them. So if I stumble on a word or two, you understand why. But he left a profound record of documents and service to our beloved Zion. And I want to now share with you some of the richness of his words and what he believed and prescribed in as a bishop in our church. And let me share those with you at this time. Bishop Holsey, 1873. The church in Thomasville, Georgia, has been burned by our enemies, but a new one has been erected on the smoky ruins. The present building is in debt and has only a few members, but these are faithful and true. Their African brethren are still waging an unholy war of persecution and slander. He's referring to the AME church against the innocent few because they choose to worship God according to their dictates of an unfettered conscience. On spiritual powers, this is what Bishop Holsey said: I care nothing for gold and silver, nor the presence and company of mankind, nor anything that would divert the mind from its deep things of God. However, I rose from my hermit home with spiritual powers and convictions that have been a wonderful help to me through all these years of struggle and toil. I became so intensely interested and profoundly engaged that sometimes I seemed to have been out of the body and in another sphere where God and angels stood nearer to men. Bishop Holsey. On the role in the establishment of the church, he says, and I quote, from 1865 to 1914, the movement to establish the Colored Methodist Episcopal Church in America was almost absolutely under my direction. In the lawmaking assembly, I presented all of the ideas and resolutions that went into effect with a single exception. Now, here's a statement that some might view quite controversial, but he makes this statement on slavery and what it meant for him. The training that I received in the narrow house of slavery has been a minister of correction and mercy to me in all these years of struggle, trial, labor, and anxiety. I have no complaint against America's slavery. It was a blessing in disguise to me and to many. It has made the Negro race what it could not have been in its native land. Slavery was but a circumstance or a link in the transitions of humanity and must have its greatest bearings upon the future. These are the words of one who experienced slavery himself. It is known, and I've heard it alluded to several times from many, including Bishop Lakey, that Bishop Holsey was very outspoken and had his share of enemies within the church. So much to the point that it became very difficult for him to even have his articles published in the Christian Index. So he created his own journal, the Golden Trumpet. There is no way, Bishop Holsey says, for me to speak through the index. And there were no other public organs in the church. Although they were persecuting you as well as myself, but you said nothing in defense of the church which we under God built up before this low scheming herd were now. Now should I stand by with still tongue and folded arms and do nothing to save the church? No. But I took the field of conflict and fought in open day until I had manufactured a wholesome sentiment sufficiently strong to turn the tide of evil away from us and save the church and save our honor and credit. End quote. On the finances of the church from his unpublished autobiography, Bishop Holsey writes, for 38 years, the financial plan, has been in operation and has worked as smooth and as easy as the wheels and piston rods of a steam engine. The big men, so-called, worked on and tampered with it and fought it. Successive general conferences chopped and scorched it, but to no avail. It shines brighter and brighter. It quickened local interest, stimulated church unity and expansion, trained the embers and ministry in the science of sacred giving, and has been the basis of support for all of the schools and colleges of the Colored Methodist Episcopal Church in America. End quote. On his preaching technique, the man that had the loudest voice and the most dramatic emotions in pulpit or on platform was necessarily, irrevocably, infallibly, and eternally in the estimation of the people, the great preacher, the fine angel of the everlasting gospel. But I continued common sense preaching, which was considered by the undiscerning multitude as very drip. My hearers would often take a nap while I was trying to do my little talking. My voice was very poor, weak, and defective, which greatly militated against me as a preacher. As a preacher's inability in those days was measured by his voice, a poor fellow like I was in a bad fix. End quote. Bishop Holsey. On the church. Not because I thought it to be the best church in itself, not because I thought it pure and better than such organizations, but I thought it to be the most fitted religious power to meet the peculiar conditions that exist in the southern states. Harmony between the two races is what is needed. There can be no progress in the betterment of the people of color without peace and harmony. Bishop Holsey. Entering a new civilization, the newly made colored citizens needed agreeable and harmonious relations, first of all, and all the time to come. And while this idea may not be regarded as a religious factor in the economy and autonomy of church relationship, yet it was a factor much desired if the best ends were to be reached, especially as referred to the colored people. I think the colored Methodist Episcopal Church in America is founded the best principles to meeting the impending conditions on the right kind of education. Bishop Holsey said, "It is great to educate, but it is still greater to impart the right kind of education. Teachers and preachers are to give shape and tone to those sentiments, ideas, and actions which are to control and characterize the Black man of tomorrow. Much depends upon what he conceives to be his relations and duties representing himself and his brother in white. Conceiving him that the white man is his enemy, and then he becomes a jarring discord. The Paine Institute is designed to counteract such tendencies." As you know, Bishop was the founder of the Paine College. He said Paine tied the colored Methodist Episcopal Church in America to the Methodist Episcopal Church South, so that as conditions would allow, that they would work together or at least along parallel lines to evangelize and save our people for God and for Christ. And I think it goes without saying that the board of trustees and the relationship between the Christian Methodist Episcopal Church and the United Methodist Episcopal Church, formerly the Methodist Episcopal Church, is one of the longest standing racial unity and partnerships in the country on getting his preaching voice. But it was a voice that I needed more than learning a gospel. What shall I do to make it thunder, scream, screech, howl, or roar, as did the junior preacher? I had heard a great Grecian orator who, to improve his voice, put pebbles of stone in his mouth and spoke against the loud roar of the waves on the seashore. Bishop Holsey was very concerned about his preaching voice and his preaching ability. And I think I've already shared that quote. These are just a few of many of the wonderful quotes that I have collected that help to give us a very clear understanding of how our founding fathers helped to shape the church that they so loved. This is an article from the 1910 edition, May 7th, of the Afro-American, with Bishop Holsey on the cover. And it announced that the CME conference will elect 2 new bishops at that time. Let me put up this picture of the daughters, 2 of the daughters of Bishop Holsey, who were also students at Paine College, Ella Holsey, and of course, Ruth Holsey became prominent educators in their own right. Here's another daughter, Kate Louise Holsey Ditson. This is the granddaughter of Bishop Holsey. I'm sorry, the daughter of Bishop Holsey. And she married the son of Amanda Dickerson, who became known as the wealthiest African-American woman in the country. Many of you might be familiar with this book, Woman of Color, Daughter of Privilege. Her son married the daughter of Bishop Holsey, and it is through their particular lineage that you have the great-great-grandson, David Franklin, who was a well-known producer and entertainer. He was the manager of Richard Pryor and Sidney Poitier and Harry Belafonte, and he was also married to the first female mayor of Atlanta, Mayor Shirley Franklin. And so David was the great great grandson of Bishop Lucius Holsey. The Holsey name continues to live on in our church. There are many churches and institutions, both past and present, that bear the name of Lucius Holsey, Holsey Haygood Hall, and many churches bear his name throughout our country as well. And so it is important that we celebrate and remember Bishop Lucius Holsey. During the last preachers conference, the pastors conference, sponsored by the Phillips School of Theology, I had the opportunity to take some of these very distinguished young preachers over to the Southview Cemetery, the very same cemetery where Congressman John Lewis was buried on this past Thursday, to take them to the grave, the final resting place of our beloved fourth bishop, Bishop Holsey. And as they were reading this, I caught this I think very poignant image, because these young men are the future of our church. And part of what we have to do as we preach and pastor is to acknowledge and to honor and to celebrate those who have gone on. This is what the 150th year of our church is about. It is about honoring, recognizing, and remembering those great men and great women who labored long and hard for our church, including Bishop Holsey, including Bishop Miles, uh, Bishop Robert S. Williams, Bishop Cottrell, and many of the other bishops that we will celebrate and that I will highlight on this show as we continue to celebrate our 150 years of service to this great country and this great community. I appreciate you joining me. On Tuesday, I hope everyone will pause for a second. Tuesday marks the 100th anniversary to the day of the death of Bishop Holsey. This is his death certificate. He died August the 4th, 1920. He was funeralized, believe it or not, at the West Mitchell Street CME Church, where I currently pastor. I tell you, I'm so tied to the history of these folks. I absolutely love it. Bishop Holsey pastored at Trinity. He was buried at West Mitchell Street. I just love to see how God just continues to engage me in my love and my passion for history and share these wonderful tidbits. So on Tuesday, I invite you to pause for a moment as we celebrate the 100th anniversary of Bishop Lucius Holsey, of the passing of Bishop Lucius Holsey. And as we remember the great contributions that he and Bishop Miles and all of the other bishops made to our beloved Zion. My brothers and sisters, thank you so much for spending time with me. There's so much to share. And this was not meant to be the exclusive presentation on these two men, but I just wanted to give you just a tidbit to whet your appetite on the phenomenal history that you already know that we have. And I look forward to you joining me on next Sunday, because I have a wonderful lineup for you. We're going to be looking at the history of women preachers and presiding elders in our church. I've already had the opportunity to interview our beloved Bishop Teresa Jefferson Snorton, the first female bishop of our church, but we're going to go back and look at the early women preachers in our church. We have some of the descendants who are going to be on with us, and some of those groundbreaking women who served as the first presiding elders in their particular states. And we're just going to spend some time in conversation with them as we continue to celebrate our history of our beloved church. God bless you. I love you. God loves you. And remember always that Black lives do matter. This is Skip Mason. Have a blessed day.